Hey everyone, it's Lunch with Mal, and today I'm here with Christelle, who has, as her title says, she's your podcast matchmaker. She has a business of helping people get on podcasts, get on a lot of podcasts in some cases, and find their audience through longer form media. So, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody just a bit about what you do?
Yes, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thanks again for having me on. So I'm Christelle Biga. I'm your podcast matchmaker, and what does that mean? It means simply that I hear what you do. I learn the audience that you want to reach and the one you want to serve, and I find the exact perfect podcast that has that audience. That's where the matchmaking comes in because I match you with the audience, the podcast that have the audience that you want to reach. And beyond just getting you on podcasts, I specifically get my clients on top rated podcasts, meaning I listen to top 5% globally. Why? It's not just numbers don't lie, first of all, but it's not just for you to brag, but it's because we want to really be intentional in what we do. We understand that our clients want to reach a large audience. We know that our clients want to be more visible or visible to more people. That's why we go to those shows, because they have a large enough audience. That's why they make it to those rankings. So
Mhm.
that's what we do in our agency, Exposure Maven. It's a complete done for you service where we really understand that not everybody has time to figure those things out, right? It's a
Right.
process that I'll be happy to share during this conversation today. But basically, that's what I do. And yes, we just working to make sure that you get more visible and you reach as many people as possible that are interested in your story. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and so the website is exposuremaven.com. And then later on, I'll share a link that gets people, it's a list of the top 100 podcasts that authors might want to be on, I think is what you said.
Yes, it's a list of 100 plus podcasts that are in the top 10% globally, right? So they
Okay.
are top rated shows. And instead of you researching and figuring out which one, where will I even find them? We have that list ready for you so that from the moment you have it, you can start pitching yourself. At least you have a list of shows already by categories, and you know that, okay, if I want to be on this type of shows, I have a list that can support me in that. And I know for sure that show has an engaged audience, a large enough audience for me to get started.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. When we talked before, I hadn't asked how big the podcasts were, but that's wild that you can get people on the top 5 or 10% of the podcasts in the world. Because we all know like there's a lot of podcasts out there that don't have a huge audience. I mean, I'm kind of one of them. Like maybe a few hundred people listen to this
And
podcast,
that's
but
not bad. That's good.
yeah.
Engagement is good too. Engagement is also key in
Yeah,
that,
well, I do like to think
yeah.
that we have a very targeted audience, so that part is good. So for authors looking to book themselves on podcasts, like what tips or strategies do you have for helping them pitch and secure interviews?
Yes, for authors, really two things: be specific and also be strategic, just like in anything else. But really research the shows. You just mentioned that there are tons of podcasts out there. Not all of them are equal. So you
Mhm.
want to first identify the shows that have the audience you are trying to reach. So if you write a book that could be, fun for kids to read, you want to find shows that have an audience of parents who have kids that topic and interest, right? You want to really be specific in your research to make sure that there is audience alignment between your book, the story of your book, and the people listening to that podcast. So that's the very first step. And once you have identified the podcasts that have the exact audience interested in the story in your book, now, of course, you have to pitch yourself in a way that makes them say yes to have you on as a guest. And the way for you to do that is to, in the pitch, not talk too much about yourself, but really show the value that you bring to the table. Because at the end of the day, a podcast host wants to provide value to their audience. I'm sure you have me on here because you believe that your audience could benefit from getting on podcasts. So
Mhm.
all podcast hosts think the same. Who is the person that can come on my show and provide value to my audience? So as you pitch yourself to those shows, keep that in mind. How can I show this host that I will bring value to the table? And once you identify how you can let them see the value to bring to the table, put that in your pitch. Now, it can be through emails or it can be an application form. Each podcast is different. Some of them have application forms, some of them use emails. So if it's an email, for example, you want to have a good subject line. I like to keep it simple because big shows, especially the ones that I get my clients on, they have a ton of pitches coming in their inbox. They don't always have time to go through all of them. So I like to keep it simple, meaning I go straight to the point in my subject line. You can develop it differently, but the one that I found works really well is really say straight up guest pitch.
Okay.
Then they know it's a pitch. And if they are, open to receiving guests on their shows, they will open because anyway, they are looking for guests, right? So be straightforward because you might write something else that they say, well, whatever. But if they know it's a pitch, they're prepared. And then when they open your email, you want to introduce yourself really briefly. You want, as I said, show the value you will bring to the table. You want to show them that you know their show. You have to be, show that it's not a random pitch that you are sending to all the hosts out there. You personalize the pitch to them, to their show, to their audience. And one good way to do that is to show that you have listened maybe to a few episodes, can refer back to one episode that maybe connects to what you're talking about. And that way you show them that, hey, you know their show and you want to maybe add more value to what was already said by previous guests, or something that their audience could benefit from because they have that problem to solve. So, and of course, if you have been on other shows before, you put it there so they can have a look, they can have a feel of your energy, know what type of guest you are, maybe by listening to a quick 30 seconds of your previous interview. And even if you have never been on a podcast, don't stop yourself, just provide value and also show them where they can find you. They can check out your website. They can maybe, if you are more active on social media and you don't have a website, give links to your social media where they can check you out to,
Right.
really decide, okay, I like what this person stands for, what this person talks about. I like what they have previously done. So yes, let's have them on the show and give it a few weeks for them to respond. Because remember, as I mentioned, podcast hosts that have big followings have tons of pitches they receive. So give them 1 or 2 weeks to respond, then follow up. It's really important, just like in anything else. You better follow up to make sure you stay top of mind, and yeah, until you get an answer. So that's really how you make sure you get on the right shows. First, identify, research the shows to make sure that there is audience alignment between the readers you are looking for your book and the people listening to that show. And then once you have, okay, this is the perfect show, pitch yourself in a way that show the value you bring to the table. Why would their audience love your book? So show it to them and then show them where to find you. So it's as simple as that, and follow up. That's it.
I like what you said about the subject line, just saying guest pitch, because I think you're right. Like it's to the point, and it makes you sound serious as
Exactly.
well. And they're not going to miss it. So that's
And
really
you're
good.
not trying to, play.
Yeah.
You straight coming. You're not playing games to try to get them. You're not manipulating anyone. That
Mhm.
means if they are open to receiving guests, they choose to read, pay attention.
Yeah.
But if not, they might open and say, "Well, another pitch." You want them to open your email knowing that, okay, I'm about to be pitched. Let me
Right.
hear what they have to say.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And also what you said about you have to, when you're pitching to them, in a way you're actually pitching to their audience, saying that like, here's the value I bring to you as a host in your audience. And I do a similar thing when I'm doing speaking engagements, because I speak at a lot of different author conferences, and I'm always saying like, I think this talk would be good for your audience based on what I know about your conference. And I'll also say like, and if you have other topics you think that would help fill a knowledge gap for your audience or something like that, I'm open to talk about those subjects because at the end of the day, anyone running a conference is their main concern is providing value to the people attending, and podcasts are the exact same thing basically.
Absolutely, absolutely. No one wants to have you on their show if the audience will not like it, because the hosts have, taken the time to build an audience.
Mhm.
That audience trusts them as an expert in what they do, and a host will always want to make the audience happy.
Yeah.
So what will make their audience happy is what they care about,
Mhm.
right? So if you show them that by having you on their show is a win-win, because you are coming, yes, to get more visibility and leverage their audience, but also their audience will get something out of it. It's a win-win, and everybody likes a win-win situation. So that's really important, as you mentioned, on each pitch. Really, when you're
Mhm.
pitching yourself, you have to show the value you bring to the table. It's not about you. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's really not about you.
Monique says she says yes, but my only issue is I'm a big introvert. So I'm an introvert big time. And we talked about that, about like how
Yes,
to handle if you're an introvert and you're scared to be on podcasts. So
we
what do you
actually
think?
discussed that point
Yeah.
before we went live. And Monique, all I will say is I will ask you one simple question. Can you talk about your book? If we just met and you told me I'm an author, and I say, "Oh, Monique, tell me, what do you write about?" Are you able to explain to me what your book is about? If the answer is yes, you can be on the podcast, because really that's what it's all about. A conversation about what your book is about. Nobody's going to have you on the podcast to talk about politics if your book is not about politics. So don't be afraid, right? If you can, at the grocery store, have someone you connect with, and then you tell them, "Hey, I'm an author," and they ask you, "Oh, tell me, what's your book about?" If you can tell them, just be assured that you can be on the podcast. There is nothing complicated. It's just a conversation. It's as simple as that. Just a conversation about your book. So you are the best person on earth to talk about your book. No one else can do it better than you do. So as much as you can be excited to talk about your new book to a friend, get excited anytime you need to be on a podcast. That's it.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense too. Monique says that she has a lot of books that she's written, which I think she's suggesting that she wouldn't know which one to talk about. But
Now, mhm. Yeah, what I would suggest, Monique, is that which one do you want to promote? Maybe you want to talk about, you promote your latest one. Now it depends really on your goal. Are you, going on podcasts to because you wrote a new book and you want people to buy it, or if you wrote a lot of books, is it a series? If it's a series, you can decide to, okay, go on shows and talk about your series and explain why people want to get on that, like the Harry Potter ones, you know. So really, your intention is important to decide which one to promote. If you have a latest one that you want to promote, you go there and talk about that one. And of course, you can mention here and there that this is not your first rodeo. You have other books,
yeah,
right?
that makes a lot. I think also when you're probably pitching to different podcasts, knowing what series you want to talk about will probably be important from the get go as well, because maybe the podcast tends to talk about certain subjects, and you might be able to have a series that aligns with those subjects. So that's the one you would pick or something like that.
Absolutely. So if you want to go on a podcast, that again, that's where the research part comes in. If you know their audience could be more interested in one of your books, that's the book you pitch. You right. You really need to make sure that when you go on that show, the audience will love the story you wrote in that book.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things you do is you have a number of different services. We'll touch on those as well. But one of the things you actually do is you help coach authors on how to actually pitch better and then what to do when they're on the podcast, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's something that we do because I love to speak. And one of the things that I used to do is actually coach people on speaking. So yes, if someone really want to be on podcast to talk about, their book, we want to, I mean, if they need that support, we offer that support to help them, because at the end of the day, when we say conversation, it can get tricky when people forget the intention they have going on the podcast, and they maybe find themselves just talking about themselves. Right, that happens. You can go on a show and forget that you're there to serve and just start telling your personal story. I love a good story. I have a great story. We're probably going to talk about it, but you have to remember, and that's where the training comes in, to stay focused. You throw a story here and there, but you come back to center, to know that at the end of the day, the reason why I'm sharing this story is to show the value of buying my book.
Right.
If I'm going to touch on this, is for people to say why they need to buy my book. So that's really a training, because sometimes we talk and we forget to come back to center, and people get lost.
Yeah.
So we have that support available for sure.
Yeah. That's really cool that you do that. Now, One of the things that we also talked about before we started was, and actually there's some eye-opening things you said for me as well, but about how people on the internet, doing on social media, it's all short form content, and in a way, promotion's kind of interrupting them. But when
Mhm.
they go to watch a podcast, they're doing it intentionally, and they're intentionally giving a larger chunk of their time. You want to sort of elaborate on that?
Yes, absolutely. So I was sharing that social media is a great place, really, to showcase what you do. Now, the beauty of podcasts is that people are more intentional when they go listen to a podcast, because on social media sometimes we are not in control of, I mean, not sometimes, we're never in control of what is on our feed.
Yeah.
Social media, the social media gods study our behaviors, and they decide for us what we should see more of or less of, right?
Mhm.
So we don't really get to pick and choose. You go, you scroll, and whatever comes and gets your attention, you stop. But with podcasts, people are more intentional, meaning someone might say, I want, sometimes I see people ask that question on social media. What is the latest book that you read that you really enjoyed? People sometimes go on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and research, podcasts about books because
Mhm.
they are looking for a new book to write or to read. So when they go there, they find a podcast that interviews authors. They go on that podcast and research maybe a topic. Your specific topic will get their attention, and they will choose that episode. Now they are more intentional because they are looking for something. And you have, if the podcast is 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you have the attention during that time. Yes, they might be listening while driving to work or, jogging, but at least they are not seeing something else happening. They don't
Right.
just scroll. They are sitting or doing whatever, but listening to you for that amount of time, which is important,
Yeah.
because you might write a long post and some people will just scroll through it, not really read. But if it's a conversation and you're engaging and they love the story, that you'd say your book is about, you captivate them. Guess what? Research showed that 68% of those listeners will buy your book because they have a chance to connect with you as the author, because they have time to hear your backstory, know you as a person a little bit more than just reading a post. So that's what makes podcasts so powerful. And on top of that, that episode is going to be available for years to come. I met an author last year and she shared with me that she wrote a book 4 years ago. She's still selling it because she went on the podcast and that episode is still making her sales. Because unlike social media, your post is going to be there for how long? I don't know. Nobody's going to go back to your profile and search everything. But when you have a podcast episode, first of all, people can share it with friends and family, and it's there for years to come. So someone will find that podcast in 5 years, re-listen to your episode, and buy your book. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really the main difference between social media and a podcast.
I totally get that. I listen to a number of different podcasts and some YouTube channels, as well. And sometimes if I find one I like, I will just listen to like or watch all of their content going back years, and
Exactly.
just and soaking it all up.
Yeah.
Um, Carolyn asks, is it optimal to go on podcasts where the host also posts on YouTube?
Not all podcasts post on YouTube. Now more and more they're doing that because they want to leverage YouTube as well. But it wasn't common for podcast hosts to post on YouTube. Now it's happening more. But really they were focusing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other platforms where people listen to podcasts. But more and more it's happening now.
Is it is that like a criteria that you look for that they post in more places, or do you find that YouTube isn't a big factor yet?
We really focus on the global ranking,
Okay.
right? Because yes, YouTube is a great platform, but at the end of the day, people and YouTube actually to show, just to show how powerful podcast is. But YouTube has created a specific how do I call it, space on YouTube for podcasts. Now they have YouTube for podcasts
Hmm.
because they know they are getting in the game, but it's still new, right? People
Right.
are used to when they want to listen on a podcast, unless they know that it's already on YouTube, they are used to going to Spotify, going to Apple Podcasts, going to, other places to listen to podcasts. Now, when they go do the global ranking, for now they are that search engine is not using YouTube yet to do the global ranking, because again it's new.
Hmm.
is people are getting into it. Even YouTube is getting into podcasts because it created that specific place for podcasts, but it's
Right.
pretty new, so it's not yet considered in the ranking of shows. That's why for us, when we research shows for our clients, we don't go by YouTube because we know where actually numbers for podcasts come from traditional podcast platforms.
Okay. Cool. That makes sense. But it sounds like YouTube doesn't hurt if they're also putting on YouTube, but they do need to be on those main platforms because that's where most people listen
Exactly.
to podcasts,
Exactly.
which makes sense. Um, Another thing you mentioned as well, when you talked a bit about like how the podcast has longevity because it's around there for a while, and crazy people like me will listen to 5 years of podcasts from a given host. Um, but also like you can reuse that content in your own promotions, and it gives you can talk about your podcast as it's upcoming. You can post about it when it happens, and then you have content that you can now use for months afterwards as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So really, it serves many purposes, and one of them is content creation because you have that. For example, this interview we are having now, I have that, right?
Mhm.
Either you share it with me, or I can just simply download it, and now I can create reels that are
Yeah.
used on social media because we know reels are great. Social media platforms push it a lot. And why do you want to use that? Sometimes I hear a conversation with a guest saying, "Why should I promote my interview?" The host has to do that. The host will do that because it's their show, obviously, but you are really, really invited to do that because it's good for you. It helps you not only have content, which is a big deal, being consistent in creating content on social media, but also establish a credibility within your existing audience. Because some people might follow you on social media because you have a dog, they have a dog, they think you guys have something in common. They don't really know what you do. But the moment they start seeing you on podcast, now they're paying attention and they're taking you more seriously. That's the credibility part of it. And people, when they find you credible, it's easier for them to say, "Let me buy their book," because they are talking about it on podcasts. People are inviting them to talk about their books on podcasts. So maybe I should get a copy. Those same people that were there on your social media for that long because they enjoyed you posting about your cat, right?
Right.
Now they take you more seriously and they're more likely to buy your book. So that's why you have also that part. When you create content just for social media, that's one content. You can't really repurpose it much. But with podcasts, you have that as a podcast. You have now reels that you can create from it. You can even create blog posts from it. You can even create a newsletters from that episode. You can really use it in so many different ways that it's just a lifesaver.
Yeah, I love it so much because authors all the time are saying, I don't know what to put in my newsletter. I don't know what to talk about, but doing this sort of thing gives you all this additional content before and after to
Exactly.
talk about. Um,
Exactly.
Carolyn asks, do podcast guests have the rights to share clips from the podcast?
Of
Is that something
course,
that
absolutely. Absolutely. We do that in our agency for our clients, right? We create clips. Oh, listen, the host will be so happy. They will love you if they realize that you share it because you sharing your interview is you sending people to their show. So they
yeah,
will love it. There is no podcast host out there who will say, "Nope, don't share your episode with your audience." Actually, every time they send you the link of the recording, they invite you to
yeah,
post it and tag them
yeah,
because who doesn't want more visibility, right? They love it.
yeah. If I had like a moment when I first saw that when she posted it, I thought, oh yeah, would you have the rights to that? But I was thinking about every single podcast I've ever been on. The host like all but begs you to share to share
Exactly.
it and use the recording
Exactly.
and promote it. So
And you want to
um,
do that as an author because let's say you promote a book on, you go on a podcast or you promote your books and you make good sales. Now,
mhm,
if you have another book, you want to go back on the podcast store, you might want to go back to the podcast you like the most. And those hosts, if they remember you being a good guest by sharing, they will be more likely to say, "Yes, come back. I love you because I know you will help me promote as well." So
yeah,
really want to do that. Yes, absolutely. Promote it.
yeah, that makes a ton of sense. You're right because you build that goodwill that will then pay off later on.
Exactly.
Um, Laura asks, how far in advance do you need to pitch?
Definitely, if you focus on top rated shows, you don't want to. I mean, depending, some of them go live, so you can pitch today and get on a show next week. But most of them, if you're planning to start your podcast or in January, you actually want to start interviewing in January. you should have started pitching yesterday.
Okay.
Because their calendar is booked in advance. Some of them for months, some of them really for months. So that's why you want to start pitching as soon as possible. The earlier the better. Because the good news is, even if you start pitching today and you think, oh, my book is coming out in March, I don't really want to be on shows before that. The good news is, anytime you get a yes from a host, they give you the opportunity to choose the date that works for you. So either they send you their calendar link and then you get to choose. You can choose to be on that show in March, but
Mhm.
at least you're prepared, because by the time you wait for March to start pitching, you might end up being on shows in June, which doesn't serve what you wanted. So
Right.
that's why the earlier you start pitching, the better. Keeping in mind that you don't have to, because you pitch today, you got a yes today, you don't have to be on a show today. You have a calendar where you can pick a date that works for you and for your marketing calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've done that with a lot of places where I get on their podcasts and I end up booking out like 3 or 4 months because that's what works for me when I'm releasing. So it's
Exactly.
definitely pretty common. So you have so obviously we've talked about like how my authors might pitch themselves and stuff like that, but that one of the things you do is you will also pitch for people as a service because, well, for all sorts of reasons. One of them being that who has time to do all that all the time, do all the research. But why don't you talk a little bit about like what you guys do for Exposure Maven for getting people on podcasts?
Yes, absolutely. We offer a done for you service because, again, we understand not everybody has time to figure out. It's just one more thing to figure out, and not everybody wants to do one more thing, right?
Yeah.
So what do we do when we have a new client? There is an onboarding questionnaire where they fill out all the information about themselves. If they are an author, about their book, they let us know the audience they are trying to reach. If they have been on other shows before, if they have a website, whatever they have, they give all of that information to us in the onboarding questionnaire. And then they have a strategy session with me where we really go through everything that they need to be prepared for to really make the most of each interview they will be booked on. And during that conversation, during that strategy session, I can suggest, sometimes people have narrow vision, and sometimes during the strategy session, I help them see bigger. For example, if someone wrote a book and they believe that that book is great for maybe this type of kids, they might forget that, oh, actually, maybe they might not understand why they should be on podcasts that are not only for authors, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes I help people see that. Let me ask you this: who is buying your book?
Right.
Right? Who is buying your book is important. Now, if you realize that, oh, actually, this book is great for parents because they will want that for their kids. Now we want to find also shows for parents, not
Yeah.
only authors, right? Not only books, but now we expand. We go to parents because we know parents will buy those books for their kids. So that's why we have that strategy session to really help you get as many opportunities as possible to have people buying your book. And once we have all those two elements, your onboarding questionnaire and your strategy session with me, you are done. Now my team takes it from there. They start researching the right shows for you to be on. They start pitching you, and you just hear from them anytime they get a yes from a host. They email you and they let you know, okay, the host wants to have you on. What days work for you for your interview? And during all that process, we give you access to a tracking sheet where you see all the shows we pitch you to, their global ranking, to know that for sure we are pitching you to top 5% shows. And when you have a booking link or a meeting link like a Zoom or a StreamYard, we have that link there so that you are organized. You have everything in one place. You have the date of your interview, time of your interview, the link, everything, so that you don't have to freak out or miss anything, because we know how inboxes
Yeah.
get crowded. You can easily forget about an interview, but we have that tracking sheet for you to have, at all time, and know what is happening and when. And once your interview is released, as we mentioned, we also promote it to our audience. We create clips that we share on our own social media and let people know, hey, our client so and so was on this show, he was talking about, give a brief overview of what you discussed, and we invite people to go listen to the full interview. And depending on the package that you get, we also offer you those reels that you can also use on your social media. So really, that's the whole process.
Yeah, and you have a variety of different packages, all the way. I think you said from 5 to 50 different 50 guaranteed placements, right?
Absolutely. So if you want to just get your feet wet, you can start with 5 guaranteed bookings within 90 days. Or if you really want to go all in on, a podcast store, it's 50 guaranteed bookings within 12 months. But in between, we have 10 guaranteed bookings within 6 months or 30 guaranteed bookings within 12 months as well. So really depending on your intention and your goals, we have those different packages.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And so the package or the downloadable that you gave everybody gives, you said it was over 100 of the top podcasts. I'm just putting it in the chat right now.
Yes.
For folks, and they can go there and pull that down and see all those top rated podcasts. And if they want to try and pitch themselves, they can do that.
Absolutely.
Using what we talked about
Yes.
today, or they can connect with you guys, and you guys can just get people on. Jill and I've actually already talked about it, and we're pretty sure we're going to use your services as well for some of our own stuff. And Laura, one of the watchers, Laura had asked if first timers should shoot for the stars or start small. But it sounds like you always shoot for the stars with everybody. You just go for this top 5% all the time.
Absolutely. So you are an expert. People think, oh, because it's my first, you're being on a podcast for the first time doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about. So for the first time, you can be on a top 1% podcast. That's totally fine. I don't know if that was a question, but yeah, if you were talking about shooting for the stars instead of, in terms of how many shows to aim to be on, you can be on as many shows as possible because, you start, you get warmed, and then you get used to it and you know what to tweak. That's why I don't have any package for one show, because in one show, really, it's not a magic pill, really, because sometimes the more you do it, the better you get. You know that you're a speaker. So the more you do it, the better you get. So that's why it's good to put a goal or to go on, as many as possible, depending on how much you can invest. But really know that it's a strategy, it's a long-term strategy. And now, if you on your first show, you are booked on a top 1% show, no need to freak out, because the same conversation you will have on a top 1% podcast is the exact same conversation you will have on a podcast that someone is doing in their basement and only their mom is listening to.
Poor mom in her basement.
They're always there for us, right?
It's right, yeah. Well, I think actually through all the different questions, we covered everything that I want to talk about. And I really thank you for being on and for sharing this. And I think it's really cool that you have this service for helping people get on podcasts. Are there any last tips or thoughts you want to share with everybody?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thanks again for having me. Really, this was an amazing conversation. It's always a pleasure for me to do this. But just for all our listeners out there, I want to encourage you, really, if anything, download the list and start. I hope the tips that I gave will help you really to start, at least pitch and see what happens. And if you need to you have a question, always feel free to reach out on social media, DM me. I'm fine. I can answer a few questions. It's okay. But don't stop yourself because you think you're not ready. Again, it's just all about talking about the amazing book that you wrote. It's your story, it's your book. So there's no other person out there better than you to talk about it. And all podcast hosts want is for you to come and be able to share that story about your book in an engaging way, in a way that makes their audience feel good. And I know you can do it. And if you don't start, you will never know how good you are. So I know someone mentioned at the beginning, I'm an introvert, but can you have a conversation? If you do, you can be on podcasts.
I love that. I think it's great. And I think a couple of people had a couple of last questions, but we won't have time for. But like you said, they can slide into your DMs on social media.
Yes, absolutely.
I found you can find your if you just search for Christelle on Instagram, for example, you'll find her there.
Yes, everywhere is the exact same name, Christelle Biga. On any social media platform, you can find me.
Yeah. So I think I'm actually pretty excited. I have my eyes open, and I think like two of the things you said were really awesome was the fact that you get this reusable content you can use over and over again, and the idea of how people are intentional with their time with podcasts, and when they're listening to them, they're sort of committing to giving more time and attention than they normally do on social media. So I think I might even like experiment with running ads to podcasts to help promote things, to sort of pull people into this mindset where like, hey, sit down and pay attention to something for a little bit longer. So thank you very much for being on. And again, folks, the link for the freebie that Christelle's given us is in the comments, we'll update and put it in the description as well. And you can find her at exposuremaven.com. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.